Alright, let's get started with this tutorial. We're going to start with XAMPP. We're going to establish our local host. We're going to do an HTML form, and then we're going to use PHP to access our MySQL database. Okay, so if you don't have XAMPP yet, you can download it from apacheandfriends.org/index.html or and download your version here. Or you can search for similar programs like this. They all work more or less the same. Now, for the purposes of this example at least. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to download and install. I am installing for Windows. So I already have it. When I do that, it will be, in my case, it's in the local disk C, and I will see an XAMPP folder. So the only thing you need to run it is to find the xampcontrol.exe, and you can right-click and send to your desktop as a shortcut if you want an easier access, pin it to this taskbar, however you want. Now that we have it here, we're going to use two things to begin with. We use Apache and we are going to use MySQL. So I'm going to click Start on both. Now, if you are on a Mac, you might have problems depending on the access or other things. So if you go to my website for this class, you can find it right here, a couple of ways you can fix that. But because I'm in Windows, I do not have that issue at the time, so I just start both. Alright, the second thing that we're going to do is we're going to explore our database. Okay, so we're going to go to localhost. Right now it's complaining because I didn't have it active yet, but one way you can reach it, localhost / dashboard will lead you to it. Okay, so you'll see this. You can go up here to phpMyAdmin. Now, this will only appear if you are running these two, and these two are green. If you are on a Mac, sometimes you'll notice that this localhost changes with the IP address, a sequence of numbers with a dot. Then you can use those numbers instead of phpMyAdmin. Or, if you wanted to reach that page from here, you could have just click on admin here, and it leads you to the same page. That's another way of reaching it. Okay, so we're here. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do a database to try our examples out. Okay, so I'm going to go to new here, and my database, it's going to be, this tutorial is based on a class I'm teaching. So if you got here not from the class, just bear with me. The page is available, and all the resources are mostly online. Available by third-party sites, so I hope you still find it useful if that's the case. But if you are in the class, just make sure that you have the UTF-8 general and create. That is to provide the character set that we need for ASCII codes to make sense in this table. You can do it for other languages, so if you want to type Swedish or Russian or German, anything that uses special characters, you would use the others. But now we're here. And it asks me to create a table. Now you can definitely create a table here, specify the columns, click go, and do it all by drag and drop, clicking here, clicking there. But because we want to be a bit more sophisticated, I'm going to go to SQL right here and actually type the queries. Now I can see here, run SQL query, queries on database, CIS 4365. This is what I have selected right here. Now, if I have a table selected or something else, those queries will only run on that scope. So make sure you're on the database to run the entire thing. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to create a table using a query. So I already have the query here so that we don't waste too much time while I type it. Let me bring it. And let me enhance the size of this a little so it's a bit more visible. They have a super small font for this. Okay, so the way we create it, create table person. In parentheses, I'm going to have a person ID, which is going to be an integer number of 11 digits. You're going to have, at most, you're going to have a last name, which is characters up to 255, a first name, and a city. Okay, and everything is inside this parentheses and separating it with semicolon. Okay, so let's run this. Okay, the query worked fine, and now I see the person table appearing here. If I click person, I see the columns. The only thing I don't see is any data inside it. Okay, now let's go back to SQL. Now you see that now my queries are running on table cis4365.person. In this case, it doesn't matter because we're only going to use one table. But if you wanted them not to be structured for a single table, I just click on database, and now we're back on running our queries on the database. Okay, so now there's a couple of things I forgot to do when I did this table. The first one is I'm going to need a primary key. So we know that primary keys have to be unique. They don't repeat themselves ever, right? And for this case, for this purpose, we're going to use the person ID. So the way we can do that is alter table person add primary key person ID, something like this. Now I can tell you that this is not going to work, but let's see. An empty result. Okay. Well, so there are a couple of problems. I don't know why it decided to do it. Let me just make sure that it did. Structure here. Okay, it actually did it. One problem that you may encounter when you're running SQL from other places, however, is that the let me go back to the database into SQL. The table actually has to be not null. The primary key has to be not null because it cannot be empty. And if you want to make sure that it doesn't repeat itself, you need to put an auto increment. So let's do both right here by alter table person again. Let's modify the ID. We already know the length and the type, but I'm just going to put it there to be safe. Not null, auto increment. Let's run this. Okay, perfect. So if we go to the structure, person, structure. Okay, so now we have it here. It's auto increment and it cannot be null. Okay, so everything is set. All right, now how do we insert things into the table? I'm going to just stay in the table because it's the only table that we're going to be using. So no point into doing it, but I can click here, insert, and I see this sample query, right? Insert into person, which is a table. They're using single quotes for that. And then single quotes for each name of each column, and then the values, and then this is what you would replace with the value that you actually want. Okay, now, how does a query would look like? Well, if we were to insert something, it will look something like this. Insert into person, no need for the quotes there if you don't want them. Keep in mind that I'm using MySQL. There are other versions of SQL, SQL Server, that might have slightly different syntax. Now for the person ID, I put 1, but it's auto increment, so it's going to choose whatever number it wants actually. Whatever number is next, it's going to ignore this, but I do need to put a number in here for this to work. Last name is Doe, first name is Jane, and she's from El Paso, right? So if I run this query and I click go, I will add it to my table. Now, the reason why I don't have to put all the column names here, it's because if I know the order in which the columns are declared, and if I am going to fill out the entire table, the entire row, then I can just go with the values and just define the values. If, however, I wanted just to write the person ID or just the last name or just the first name, you know, on an entry, then I would have to define the columns in the order that I want to put them in, and then the values in the order of the columns, right? So for example, if I wanted to put just person ID and first name, I would have to remove this one right here. I would have to remove this one right here. And I would have to remove the value which was for last name and the value that was for city. So this way I would add these two. So keep in mind, we're inserting, right? Updating would be a different matter. Updating, it's updating the table person, and then set this column to this value, 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 where there is a condition. So for example, the condition could be that person ID is equals 1. So where person ID is equals 1, change your last name, or change your first name, or do something else, right? This is the syntax, but again, you can type it in my preferred style, up to you, which looks something like this. Now, what if I want to insert multiple things, multiple rows into the database? Well, we don't have to worry about that because a short syntax version for this would be just to put a comma, put the next entry, and so on and so forth. It's separated by parentheses to put as many entries as you want. So if I click go on this one, it runs, and I'm inserting, I know the columns, I know the order, so I'm inserting all these values in the first row, all these values in the second row. Let's check. I go to structure, I go to browse, and here it is, Jane Doe, John Smith, El Paso, and Juarez. All right, perfect. So right now we're modifying this database. We see that it works. We established our table. However, this is not going to be useful for a user. A user is not going to have access to this interface and be able to click around and put all these things. So a couple of things before we move on. If you're wondering how I learned how to do all of this, right, w3schools.com, it's a great resource. I am right now on SQL. And there's a couple of things to note. Let's go to more, right? You see here that you have some server-side things, and then you have some other things right here, right? For this tutorial, we're using HTML. We are using PHP, and we're using MySQL, which is, I don't see it listed here, but that's somewhere around here, right? The bottom line here is that HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all of these happen on the side of the client. The server side, oh, here it is, the SQL and PHP happen on the server, right? Now, what does that mean? It means that we can do some interesting stuff on the client that we cannot do on the server, right? For now, I'm going to open Edge, right? And so, for example, I'm going to just show you the difference between server-side and client-side, right? Right now, I'm going to use a very small script in JavaScript. So let's go to something interesting like the Twitter of the President of the United States, right? I'm going to open it. And you might be thinking, how is this related to anything? So let's find something that, wow, this guy tweets too much. Why did I choose this? Okay, so let's see this, the angry majority, right? So I'm going to click on this tweet. We're here and there. Now, obviously this information is coming from a server, from a Twitter server, right? But I have a bookmark here with a very short JavaScript. You can see it popping up right there, and you can actually copy it and put it in a bookmark yourself. So once I click this bookmark, I'm telling it that I can actually edit the documents in the internet, right? For prototyping, for testing. So again, this is JavaScript. If I click this, you see the code up here. And then I don't like the angry majority, so let's do the happy majority with a happy face and no exclamation points, right? So let's all be happy. Obviously, he didn't say that. Obviously, if you go into your Twitter account and try to check this, it's still going to say the angry majority. This is an example of something that happens on the client side using JavaScript. Only I can see it. This is only happening in my browser, right? Now, if you were to modify SQL or PHP, then everybody would see it, right? If I manage to get into Twitter's database and change things, then it applies to everyone. This is obviously usually very secure for large companies. So HTML, it's just the visuals. JavaScript, it's a bit of code that happens on your browser only. And SQL and PHP, for the purposes of this tutorial, is what holds the database and what connects the database to the stuff on what we call the front end. Okay, so moving on, you can see that there's tutorials for everything here. Most importantly, SQL, right? So SQL so far, whatever I need to do I need to create a primary key? Well, here it is. And here is how you put it. Well, do I need to create, select something from a table? Here it is with the syntax. Do I need to insert into the table? Here it is with the syntax, with exercises, with examples, with try it yourself examples, right? So make sure you know this section right here. It's going to help you a lot. All right, so our next step is to actually create a web page, a front end, something that we can see. Now, where do we put our web page? Normally, that would go on an actual server. However, for the purposes of this tutorial, and because we're doing it in localhost, you would go to XAMPP. Remember how we got here? If you don't remember how you got here or what it is, you can go to config, click on any of these browse, And then you see it opens a folder here, so you can just pull up to XAMPP and then find the htdocs folder. Okay, the htdocs folder looks something like this. All right, now let me minimize this, and I have two windows open, so let me minimize this one as well. Okay, here we go. So in htdocs is where we can type our code. Right now I have something here called home HTML. Now, how do I access this code that I put in HTML? Well, first of all, let me click Edit with Notepad++ so that it doesn't open a web browser. If I do that, I'll see some code here that comes from the HTML that I wrote. However, it opens with Chrome because in HTML, it's basically a hypertext markup language. It is a website, a web page. So I'm using Notepad++ because it's free and it has a lot of languages, including HTML. And down here is PHP, and down here is SQL. So what happens when you choose a language? You see all these little fancy colors and highlights that help you know when you're messing something up. So if I had forgotten these quotation marks, probably not the best example, but maybe, well, I don't know, something like this. You see how it changes color? I can easily find that I had an error there or a typo. Okay. So what is this HTML doing? Well, let's check it out. How do we access it? If you are in Windows, you just type localhost/home.html. So basically the name of the page after typing localhost. If you're in a Mac, you might need to type the IP address here, which is the number. Okay, and it opens this horrible website. How would we make this prettier? Well, you can go here and start learning JavaScript and CSS and a bunch of other things to make this more interactive. But in the meantime, let's have it looking like this. Okay, so what is this? Here's a code. Let me make it a bit larger. There we go. And here's the page. Right, so what I'm saying here is this is an HTML document, opening and closing tags for the body. And this is a form, opening and closing tags for the form. So what are we saying here? Well, that whenever you perform an action in this form, you're going to run this script called connect.php. First name, it's this part right here. This tags right here are input type text, name, first name. So it's basically the text box, and that text box is named first name, right? It's kind of like a variable if you know a bit of programming. We'll get back to this. We have another one for last name, and we have another one for city. These are names that I chose for my text fields. However, please notice that these names kind of match the ones that we have here. Last name, first name, city, case, and everything to make it clearer, to make it easier, right? So let's see, how do we learn how to do that? Well, just like SQL, you have all the tags right here, right? Sometimes it's the harder part is not knowing what tag you're looking for. But in this case, we know that it's form. And so if you notice, this looks very similar to what we have. Okay, now there are a lot of attributes and there are a lot of things that you can do, and there are a lot of try it yourself options. But one of the things that you might want to check out is the input. Right, so let's see, where is input here? Here we go, input. All right, so input, it's compatible with all browsers, and you have a ton of other tags here, right? How do you modify the look, the feel, and then the type? You can make it a button, you can make it a checkbox, you can make it a color, you can make it date, URL, time, email, whatever you want for data validation. How do you do it? By going to where it says type equals text, you would change it for type equals email, type equals color, type equals password to put asterisks on it. Basically, you can do a lot of things with the input type, right? And again, this very similar to what we have here, except I wrote some text and I named them the same as my database. Just for clarity, this is just how we're going to access things later. Okay, so far, so good. This is our HTML code, and if I open it at home, here we go. Now, if I click submit, what's going to happen is it's going to go to connect.php. Now, what is in connect.php? So please recall that just as I have home.html here, I also have connect.php here. right? So let's open that code that I have. Okay, and it looks something like this. So whenever I click on submit, whoops, sorry, I did not. So I'm just going to put my name and then the city of El Paso. I'm just going to put El Paso in lowercase and submit. And it says, welcome, Ivan. Let's get you into the database. New record created successfully. This is an empty record that I put by accident just right now. But here we go. Hello, this is Ivan from El Paso. So how do I get this Ivan to appear here from the previous page? So what happens is that what this code is doing, the home, first name and whatever you type in gets passed to the next page. How? By this question mark right here. First name equals and then whatever I type there. And last name equals and whatever I type there. And city equals and whatever I type there. Because the URL cannot handle empty spaces, it puts a plus sign, right? So this is how I pass the things from this HTML to this other page called PHP, Connect PHP. Now that's only half the battle, right? Because this welcome, let's get you into the database, it's coming from here. How do I get the information from the URL? By using this statement right here, which is basically get the first name, right? So welcome, and then this indicates that there is some PHP code inside my HTML. And then inside that code, I use a get function to get the first name, which is whatever I have here, and then print it out. Now, granted, this is very unsafe because I am passing everything as plain text, right? And this might lend itself to, do some potentially SQL injection by typing here some other code or something else that the form didn't let me, so on. But use it at your own risk, but you have to start somewhere, right? This is the simplest way of doing this from scratch, not using any platforms or frameworks. Okay. So now we know that we're using this get first name. How do we know that we're using this get first name? Because we also have a section for PHP here, right? And so PHP has a section here on form handling and a lot of other things. And in here, you can see the HTML, which again looks very similar. And then here you can see the PHP. Welcome, and then the post, and then in this case, the form was asking for a name and email. Right, but in our case, first name, last name, everything else. Now they are using post. Here they are using get. There's differences between post and get, and you can find all about that too, somewhere around here. For our purposes, we're going to be using get and not worry too much about it right now. So again, right now, this is just printing whatever we found from the URL in here. So welcome Ivan because it's coming from here. Now, what if I actually want to put this in a database, right? If you're using XAMPP, you're going to have to type this code as it is. What this is the username's default, which is root, the password, which is empty, the database that we're using, which is this one. It's the one I created. It's his name right here. And the host, in this case, it's a local host. If you were to connect to a real server, you would have to change this for the access to the server, right? That would be provided by someone from the IT department, or if you are the IT department, you can set these yourself on a live server, right? Keep in mind that the passwords for the server are not the same as the passwords and access credentials for the database. The database lives inside the server, right? So accessing the server and accessing the database are two different things. In this case, our focus is the database. All right, now, the first thing we do once we try to connect is we type this code right here. What this is going to say is it's going to check, could you connect? If there was an error, die, and print the error to the best of your ability. Right? If there wasn't an error, we will have to type code to insert something in our SQL. So now, before we go into this actual query right here, I'm actually going to remove it for just a second to walk through the process. Let me just put something here. Okay, so the first thing that you have to do is well, in PHP, you know that you use echo to print stuff, right? And whatever you echo can include HTML tags and they will take effect. So you can print HTML basically from PHP. Okay, knowing that, the first thing you need to do when you're going to run a query, in fact, let's forget about this section for now. Let me just put it in some easily accessible place. Okay, you can just type the query. You put it as text, and then to run it, basically, you type this code right here. You're going to assign to result. The connection is going to run this query. If the result has some rows, meaning the result actually returns something, then we use this while loop. So for each row that has a result, you kind of fetch it, and then you can print it. If this result had no rows, then it means that there were no results, so you print there were no results. Right? Now, this query right here is basically selecting everything from the person table. So when we go here, if I refresh the page, oh, well, if I try this again, I forgot to save my code. Pretty common mistake. So I see it red here, so I didn't save it, so obviously it didn't do that. So I inserted myself like 10 times into the database. Ignore that. But you know, if I do that and I keep refreshing, I no longer insert myself every time. I just see this printouts right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are coming from the local host. If I refresh this, we can see that we are at 7 and we have a ton of repeats. So I'm just going to choose the repeats and delete them. Yes. That's an easy way to delete them. So if I go back here, you know, I can refresh, nothing happens. If I submit, it does get my name from up here, but it actually doesn't insert me in the database. It doesn't print like insert successful, and it doesn't print me down here. Why? Because the query that we're doing here is just selecting everything from a table and printing it out. Now, if you're new to programming, this can be a bit overwhelming. Just remember to type the query. You can name this however you want, as long as you use it here. Exactly the same. This code, it's basically a standard template for if you return a result, while there's results, print everything in every row. Now, how do we print the hello Jane Doe from El Paso? That is done through this echo right here. So the first thing is print the hello. These dot means add another text. So print hello, then add the text of the row that has first name. And because this is a loop, so it's going to execute for every single row that the result returned. This is going to be the first row. So the first row, on first name, we have Jane. So it's going to print it. Then add a space. So concatenate. This means just add, mix, combine into the same single text. An empty space, which is in quotation marks. This is what separates this Jane from Doe. Then add again, and then add a new row, this last name. And then add again, add the word from with spaces on this side. We're so far here. And then dot again to combine it with the actual city. Now this is going to happen for every result that we found on the database from this query right here. Okay, so this solves the problem of reading from our database from a PHP page, from an actual website, web page where users can actually access this. However, this does not solve the problem of putting something in it, right? So how do we put something in it? To put something in it, we have another set of code, right? So the set of code to insert the template itself will look something like this, okay? What is it? If the query insert is equals true, this means that the query is properly formed and the query could run and it actually inserted something in the database. Then it's going to tell us new record created successfully, and it's going to appear here. The BR, it's a break tag, so it will just switch us to the next line and let us see, just keep things a bit organized. If you can't, then you print an error. You print how the query looks like, and you try to print the error, right? So this is to tell you, like, hey, you messed up your query. Here's how it looks like. Try to find out what the error is. So the only thing that we're missing is the statement that looks something like this. In this case, I'm going to call it SQL insert, right? because that's what we were going to do. And we said equals. And so in this quotes, we need to put the insert, right? So let's remember how one inserts something into the table, right? If I were to put in here this code right here, you remember how we use this directly on our local host right here to add Jane Doe and John Smith, right? So technically, if I put it here and then I run the query, I will put it in the database. But what happens if I try to do that? It gives me an error around Doe on line 18. Where is it? Right here. Now, see another advantage of using Notepad++ or some editor that has the language into it. You see how everything here is grayed out, and then here kind of these are black, whereas this should be all grayed out. Right, so the problem is that for our query to actually run, we need double quotes or single quotes. And if you were trying to, let's take this out for a while, if you were trying to echo something, this prints, right, whatever's inside here. So let's save it. If we were trying to do this. Did I miss something? Oh, I missed the semicolon. I'm sorry. Okay, save this time. And this prints. Please disregard this. Like right now, we're work in progress, but this prints the code. This is what I wanted to show you. So this part right here, this prints. The error comes because we don't have a query here, so it's printing out basically this. Anyways, this prints. Now, what happens if I wanted to put prints in quotation marks? If I do this, I'm basically telling the echo, this is a text, this is I don't know what, this is another text, and then close it up, right? So it cuts the text because for PHP to know, it needs an opening and closing quotes. And whenever you put a quote that you actually wanted to print, well, PHP doesn't know that it's in between the quotes that you define. So one way to do this is to use escape sequences. You see, as soon as I put these diagonals here, you see how everything turns back to gray, and then this looks normal, and everything else looks normal, and everything is good with the world again. Let's refresh it. This prints, and now I can print the quotation marks. Perfect. So I can do a backslash to print the quotation marks, and that would take care of that. So going back to, I'm just going to Control-C a bit, undo. Going back to this, if I wanted to put this query in, I can just put escape sequences here, and you can see how it changes as I go. And this basically tells it, print the quotes. Do not, we're not finished yet. Just print the quotation mark. Here we go. Right. So if we run this, this will actually insert another Jane Doe into our database. Right. And let's just try it. Let's refresh. Oh, well, in this case, I did manage to put the same primary key. I'm going to put a 0. There we go. New record created successfully. Jane Doe from El Paso. And if I were to go to my table here and I refresh, I have an 8. This is because the auto increment never resets. So even the ones I deleted, the auto increment keeps counting. So okay, here we go. I managed to add a Jane Doe by putting this query right here. Right? Now, the only step missing is that we want, instead of this Doe and this Jane and this El Paso, we actually want it to come from the form, right? We want to get it from up here, from the URL. Now, remember how we did that to print welcome Ivan, right? We have it, where is it? Here. Welcome. This is the Ivan, right? So if I wanted to get this Ivan to be put into the database, well, you might think I just have to copy it, and you change it with Jane. And there you go. Not really. Why? Because you still have to separate the string and then concatenate it or paste it with the other strings. All right? Something that looks like this. Now, you're going to get these quotation marks wrong a lot of the times because this is saying start the text, put all of these into the text, stop the text, but print this last quotation marks, add these, wherever it comes from the URL, then start the text again and print the new quotation marks. See, I had an error right there. Fortunately for us, I spent some time cleaning up my query, so it should look something like this. So maximize it so you get to see it all, right? So insert into person values 0 so that it always uses the auto increment. Print a quotation marks. Close the string. At the, this should be actually, because of the order of our table, this should be the last name. This should be the first name. So you get the last name from the URL, put it in, attach it to, open another text, print some quotes, put a comma, print some other quotes, and the text, attach it to the first name, then attach it to open text, print some quotes, print a comma, print another quotes, close the text, attach it to the city, then open text, print a quote, print a closing parentheses, close the entire text. One way you can check is you can actually, before we continue with this, we can do an echo here of our SQL insert, right? So if I were to do this, now I can go back to my page here. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to leave myself there since I'm not in the database. I'm going to click submit. This is from home HTML, the form. And then, welcome Ivan, let's get you into the database. Then the echo is I am printing the query. It should look like this. If it doesn't look like this, then I can easily tell like, oh, I'm missing a quote marks here. It's throwing me an error, something like that. Then it tells me new record created successfully, which means we arrived here, right? So we type this query, we check that it's properly written, we actually insert it in the database, and then when we get everything from the database using this right here, you can just see everything printed, and I am on the database right now, and this information actually came from the URL. If I were to check here, it would be number 9. And here it is, my entry on the database. So basically, this covers everything from creating your database, creating your table, creating a couple of samples for the insert, altering the table, updating the table, difference between client side and server side, resources for SQL, for PHP, for HTML, where to download XAMPP, then building an HTML form right here, and then building the PHP code right here. So this basically wraps it up. I hope you found it helpful. This is a review of almost the entire class. And thank you so much for watching.